but serves as a gesture of respect to the land we are on. Now please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. We will now open public comment pursuant to the California Government Code section 54954.3a. Members of the public wishing to address the council board may do so at the beginning of the special meeting, and such comments shall be limited to the special meeting topic, which is our enterprise fund budget study session. Do we have a Zoom attendee?
We do. Thank you, Mayor Sparks. Speaking to our Zoom attendees, please use the raise hand icon to make a public comment. Mayor Sparks, that'll end public comment.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no one in the chambers, we will go ahead and move on to the study sessions. I'll turn it over to you.
So good evening, Mayor, council members, fellow staff, and public participants online and maybe soon to be here public. So just a quick moment to talk about how the agenda packet is put together. There's one presentation that's going to cover items both A and B, just kind of nice to keep everything in one presentation. And there's several sections within it where we'll stop for questions in regarding to the sections that are just covered. So without further ado, next slide, please. So within this study session, we'll recap the budget schedule, the city council goals and objectives, dive into the funds for the water and sewer, capital projects, as well as a summary of the general fund, special revenue funds, and the internal service funds. Within the agenda packet, we provided workbooks for all of the funds, plus the capital project listing, the allocated contract summary, as well as a summary of the transfers in and transfers out. Next slide. So this process started February 20th with our strategic planning sessions. And then we held our first budget study session covering the general fund and our updated project prioritization. That was held on April 2nd. We have this meeting, and then it's going to be followed with our proposed budget adoption. So everything hopefully coming together in a nice pretty package on June 11th for council adoption. Next slide. So this slide is kind of the presentation of the council's summary goals and objectives, including the 5 key goals, which are the long-term vitality, addressing climate change, community engagement enhancement, creating an equitable, compassionate, and healthy community, as well as supporting the best-in-class community service. Next slide. So as a budget is really a financial plan for the future, there is a certain level of uncertainty in any plan. There are certain assumptions that have to be made in order to put it into a plan. For the city of revenues, they're based on the available information we have from both consultants as well as reliable experts in the field when available. Staff are also really pretty prudent on checking these outside estimates for reasonability and making sure they're in line with our conservative approach to make sure we're not going to be reliant on revenues that might not come to fruition. Cotati's revenue base is primarily driven by sales tax as a combination of Bradley Burns and Measure S. We also have growing cannabis business tax and now investment earnings due to increased interest rates. We do, however, lack in TOT and cannot rely on impact fees from development for capital. There are other assumptions for each one of the specific funds that we'll go into a little bit when we discuss those major funds. Next slide. Just like revenues, we have to build some foundational assumptions for expenses. I know we kind of covered this already in our general fund study session, but it goes, it's important to remember that we can control expenses a little bit more than we can control revenues. Revenues are what they come in to be. We can't make our properties worth more and get more tax from them. However, we can, control some expenses primarily by delaying or canceling projects, But what we did include are those allocated contract services for projects as discussed during our previous study session and are included in packet page 95. We have constant level of service, which means we kind of have the same budgeted FTE for our staff. We have our payments of debt service for both the streets and UAL bonds, as well as proposed ADP to CalPERS, which was an additional $335,000. It also does include insurance increases based on estimates. However, they really haven't got a final number from them, so those could be changing once we get some final numbers. They like to throw it in right after you adopt your budget. So hopefully that doesn't happen and we can get some better numbers before then. Lastly, it does not include any of the changes for unnegotiated MOUs right now. So currently we have the CPOA and the CPMA unions, which are currently in negotiations. So none of those costs for increases are included here. Next slide. So starting off with the enterprise funds, please note that there were some minor errors noted. Thank you for pointing them out and helping me get them fixed. They were noted with the water fund worksheets. So we've provided some new pages for those funds, which are attached to the agenda and provided to council and in the back of the room. The changes items have been highlighted for your review and that's primarily just the water fund. So next slide. Starting with the highlights. Both the operating funds for the water and sewer are meeting the required reserve of 33%. The proposed budget revenues include the proposed rate changes per the adopted rate study. The revenues and expenses we're trying to keep them pretty conservative. They're based on projections and delaying some costs, primarily the sewer inflow and infiltration projects. We wanted to keep those going. However, we've kind of delayed some of those as we're monitoring the sewer fund capital projects and their fund balance requirements. Next slide. So the water fund, next slide, please. Again, budget assumptions that are going into there. We have the water rate adjustments for fiscal year 24-25. So we had the adopted rates, which were in effect starting June 2022. We have a 5-year rate increase that's been adopted. We are currently in the works with rate study evaluation. And so we'll be moving forward with that to see where we are, if we're continuing to be on track, if we're off track, and what adjustments might be proposed to council in the future. We are expecting the deliveries of water to continue to decline. This year they really have declined significantly. Even though we have some rate increases, the consumption of water isn't where we were expecting it to be. So we're, again, being conservative, expecting them to just still continue to decline a little bit. Hopefully that's not the case and we get some, I hate to say people use more water, but you know, as people start irrigating, things will maybe look a little bit different. We do have some inter-fund debt service back to the general fund for the UAL payments. And the proposed capital projects and equipment improvements include the continued water meter replacements. So we still have a handful of census meters that are the older meters in our system that we're just working to kind of programmatically replace those every year. We have the SCADA server upgrade relocation, so that's moving some of our significant software as well as upgrading those servers. We have the Well 1A and Well 3 maintenance project and the West Sierra tank recoding project. Next slide.
We had a question.
I just have a simple question. It's a Craig question. I can't remember, what is the lifespan of a water meter? How long do they typically last? I can't remember.
They've got batteries that last 20 years,
Okay.
about.
Okay, thank you.
So that's something we're also looking in the future. We're going to start with our fixed asset system, scheduling out replacement of the significant infrastructure we put in 2016, looking towards what it's going to take to start scheduling those replacements so that we're ahead of it, just like we do with the vehicle replacement fund. So, thank you. So changes in the operational expenditures. So we have the one-time UAL ADP, as discussed, and this is their proportion of it based on the FTE allocation. And so this is the amount that goes to the water fund. We have, again, full staffing that's proposed. We have the contract services with increasing insurance. We have continued water conservation programs that we want to continue to fund, as well as the continued slow water consumption, which is leading to the decreased little bit of revenue. We also are continuing to fund repairs and maintenance, including the water main flushing services and the vehicle maintenance contributions. Again, the changes in revenue, we have that kind of flat growth where we have reduced consumption offset by the increased rates. There's also no significant connection fees. We don't really want to include connection fees for development projects that we aren't sure are going to come to fruition. So those have not been included at this time. Next slide. I also wanted to provide the slides from our water rate study from 2022, where it planned out the revenues and expenses and the impacts on fund balances going out to 20. So for 2024, the combined ending fund balance is just below the targeted reserve level, and in 2025, it's just crossed the target. Our budget shows a little bit of a better picture. However, the 24-25 budget has expenses in excess of revenues of $141. So our operating revenues aren't meeting our operating expenses. It's a very fine line and everything's conservative, so I think we're fine. However, it is on trend. That's going to be more in line with what our study says. So we've kind of delayed it, maybe moved that a little bit over, but we're looking with that significant funding for the West Sierra Tank Recoating Project, as well as the other projects we have coming up. We want to be mindful of how the fund balance is going to come in to meet our required reserve, as well as continued needs for capital improvements. Next slide. Here's a listing of the kind of embedded contract services that are included within the water operating fund. So these aren't really the allocated ones. They're consistent with prior years with the engineering services and the main cleaning as previously discussed, and the continued conservation programs. This does not include the largest contract, which is with the water agency, which is assumed to be approximately $650,000 in the next fiscal year. Next slide. Oh, can you go to the previous slide? So next gen, the one that's on the bottom of that, that's that fixed asset program that we're using now to maintain and monitor those fixed assets as previously mentioned. So next slide. So on to our sewer fund, or I like to call it our wastewater fund. Something about the word sewer, just kind of not quite right, but everyone knows it is sewer, so I'll go back to it. So the budget assumptions for sewer, fairly similar. So we have a proposed rate adjustment that was per the adopted rate study in 2022, or the rates are determined based on the cost of the treatment, right? And all the city costs that go to manage the facility or the infrastructure that's here, and the billing and the merchant fees and the insurance and everything else. So as you know, the city does not have a treatment facility, but rather sends the wastewater to the Santa Rosa for processing. And so it's very dependent on those costs from them. They are the main determiner of the expense for the funds. The proposed capital projects for the fund are really just the SCADA server upgrade and relocation for this year. Next slide. Very similar to the water fund, we have the one-time UAL, ADP, as well as budgeting based on full staffing. Again, the staffing aren't individual people that are associated with this fund, but rather an allocation of individual people that work in water and sewer and streets and parks and billing for, budgeting or, so it is an allocation of their services that get put here, but it is based on everyone being 100% employed the whole year. We have those same allocated contract services, increased in insurance, and the increase in the wastewater treatment costs of approximately 6.8%. Changes in revenues, again, we are not estimating any connection fees to come in, and we do have some investment earnings, so water had significantly more, but because of the pooled cash balance that we're gonna hold in sewer, it has less to contribute, so it's gonna be earning less. So those are a little bit pulled down and a little bit different than the water fund. And the rate increase is based on primarily the basin consumption, so as water consumption goes down, sewer consumption goes down, and so that also kind of meets the same trend as the water. Next slide. Again, we've provided the sewer rate study graphic. As you can see, it projects the combined ending fund balance to bounce above and below the target reserve starting fiscal year 2025 through 2032. So really, even at 2022, when we adopted this rate study, we knew that this fund was going to be continuously just hovering right there at that required reserve fund balance needs for the fund. And so that's why we know it's more financially at risk and has continued to be monitored. And again, it was yellow in our last quarterly update, and so that's why we are looking forward to having another touch base with our rate study and evaluating this further going forward. Next slide. Some of the contracts that are included are primarily those which are split between water and sewer, as they serve both of them. They also have specific general engineering services that are fairly minor, as well as specialty calibrating repairs for the sewer flow meters. Next slide. So this will start a first break for our questions, so I'll turn it back to the mayor to for any questions.
Right, questions? No. I have a question. On packet page 24, the wastewater study, rate study, it looks like the combined ending fund balance is staying at the target reserve level in the bottom graph, but in the top graph, it looks like expenses are exceeding the existing rate revenue consistently every year. So how does it stay? How is the fund balance staying on target in that bottom graph if it's projected to be so low, so far below? Revenues are projected to be so far below expenses every year.
So I do believe there's and it should be included in here, the connection fees, so the non-rate revenue and the existing rate revenue, so and the additional rate revenue. So those three combined would be above the expenses. So it kind of shows it below 2 years, but those are the 2 years it dips below between 25, 26, 27, and then in 20. So I think it's that you're using some of it. Go ahead, Damian. If you have
Yeah, it's just once you get past fiscal 25 in that chart, 26 is basically on par with the revenue in terms of expenses. But
I'm sorry. I think I'm misunderstanding the graph then. The additional, what is the additional rate revenue? Is that from revenue that we're expected to already get based on increases in the future that are planned for?
Yeah, the rate plan. The rate plan would bring in, that's that dark green part of it. So there's years where we exceed the rate revenue, but years where we don't exceed it. And so in net, it keeps it about the same.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a question. I'm not sure, like with the governor's deficit, is any of these funds impacted by any of the reductions?
I hate to say no, because there's always going to be some special way that they find some, I hate to put it in the universe, but these are really customer fees that drive the revenue, and then the expenses come in on the other side, and those are direct expenses for operating the funds. So I don't believe there would be any way that they could find a way to impact these funds. But again, if they try and do something with helpers or
I just appreciate that you're very prudent and conservative when you're providing this for us. But I just kind of wonder what outside kind of situations may affect kind of our budget.
The primary outside, and that's why we include it in the quarterly updates, are really the rates imposed on us, their increases from the water agency and the wastewater treatment plants.
Okay.
So those are significant pieces to that, as well as the insurance that hits the citywide component. Those are really the primary
Okay.
items that affect these funds.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think we're good. I don't see any other questions.
Okay. Next slide. Perfect, thank you. So next I wanted to present the internal service funds. I know it's a little bit different than what I said in my introduction, how we were going to go through. However, the internal service funds operate in a similar function as the water and sewer funds in that they're supposed to operate like a business. So revenue or expenses go out and then they bill for those expenses. So we have both the vehicle replacement fund as well as a compensated absences fund. So for the vehicle replacement fund, we have a schedule of vehicles that we know are in need of replacement, and we can forecast them out, know, the lifeline of those vehicles, and try and expense out or send out bills to the relevant departments and funds that use these vehicles, so that we are pre-funding and scheduling for the replacement of those vehicles and equipment. Likewise, for the compensated absences, it's another liability for the city that we don't want to have on hand and not have the cash or balance readily available to pay for those liabilities. And so that works in the same manner, where we have estimates on what's going to be paid out that year, plus minus a little bit, so that we can keep that fund balance in case we do have to make a significant pay down on those compensated absences balances. So next slide. Starting again with the highlights for these funds, they maintain appropriate reserve to meet expenses and build limited reserves for future fund resiliency for both of the funds. We've proposed a schedule for the vehicle replacement, which includes replacement of also not just vehicles, but some aged equipment, because that can sometimes add up, here and there. We also have the compensated absences for fiscal year 24-25. We're proposing that it's going to meet our payout expectations, and it meets the 30% of that liability that I was just speaking about. It meets 30% of it that we had as of the fiscal year end 2022-23. So we have an additional fund balance reserve there available that would meet additional liability. Lastly, we have the compensated absences expenditures and revenues that are allocated based on that FTE, and then build out to those departments and funds based on that allocation of the liability. Next slide. So for the actual vehicles, we have the replacement of one police SUV. We're evaluating the fuel efficiency and environmentally friendly viability of the vehicles currently. We also have pending public works flatbed dump truck. It's been really difficult to replace. And we also have a handful of other public works specifically equipment that's in need of replacement, which we've scheduled in here. And we've also this year included the repairs and maintenance of the existing fleet, so that way we can see what the actual total cost of really this vehicle maintenance is taking. So before we kind of had it spread out between all the different funds and all the different departments, and the police department had this giant repairs maintenance, not that they're still not going to have it, but you really didn't have a separated location to look at the total repairs and maintenance of the fleet. And so now we've moved that so that we have that expense kind of shown in a separate fund where you can see what our estimate is for that repairs and maintenance combined. Next slide. So for compensated absences, really we have uncertain timing for payouts. So typically there's more activity in early July when everyone kind of gets a COLA that's per their MOU, as well as at the end of the year when people are doing payouts that are required per their agreements or maximizing contributions to our 457 plans. But we've designed it to maintain government-wide compensated absences liability, kind of trying to keep it at a minimum and make sure we have the coverage to fund any of that liability as it comes up. And again, like I said, the balances are charged to the funds and departments that they're applicable to. So that leads to my next question section, and so I just turn it back to you for any questions.
Right. Any questions from the council? Let's go ahead.
Did I understand you to say that people are waiting till July for changes in the contract to cash out the previous, is that what
So,
you said?
Yes, so typically, payouts do happen. They can happen any time of the year. Someone can
Okay.
ask for a cash out of their time that they've earned. So they've earned it, and so it typically, when it happens, is at the very, in July or at the end of the year, when people are trying to maximize other components of it if they can't use it for vacation or other time off.
But if I heard you correctly, and I'm not sure I did, if there is a cost of living increase July 1st, they cash out at a higher rate for hours that they've accumulated and booked?
That's correct.
All right, other questions? Okay, I think we can continue.
Next slide. Thank you. So next is everyone's favorite capital projects. These funds outline the city projects or improvements planned with the estimated funding requirements. I wanted to point out that these new worksheets were also provided to council as well as to the public and attached to the agenda for the capital projects pages, as unfortunately the dollar changes and the percentage changes, somehow Excel file, things get away with you and changing lots of things. And so they have been corrected and have been provided, and they've been highlighted in the worksheets that were provided. None of the actual dollars amounts associated with the budgets have been revised, so it's just the percentages and dollar changes. Next slide. So for streets, there's approximately $3.25 million of expenditures planned for the 24-25 fiscal year. We have a streets pavement slurry seal maintenance project because we want to continue to maintain the streets that we've already invested so much in. We don't want them degrading. And so that's going to be continuing as a maintenance project. We have the pedestrian safety improvements, our gateway signage, the continuation of the park and ride replacement project. So that is currently happening right now, and we're expecting it to roll into the next fiscal year. We have the class 1 pathway maintenance, landscaping improvements, which again, that landscaping improvements is something that we've done over the last 4 years. No, just 1 year? I'm in multiple years right now. Sorry, I'm in a budget audit. Okay, so we're going to plan it for the next 4 years. I'll leave it at that. Yeah. Oh, demo garden was last year. Yes. Okay. So we do have that 35,000 planned where we want to make sure we're doing some landscape maintenance and improvements throughout the city on a year-by-year basis, just like we program for our streets. Next slide. So those are all funded primarily, the previous slides funded from general fund transfers as well as special revenue funds. So those are our gas tax, our MTC funds, our RMRA, all have gone to fund those projects. So we also have some grant funding matching for the Redwood Drive and Cypress project, which is ongoing right now, as well, and we expect to roll into the next fiscal year. We also have the Highway 116 and Cotati intersection, which is a continued project, and this is going to be the continued design on that project. And the sidewalk gap closure, which is, grant funded, which we look forward to moving forward again on next year. Next slide. So next is parks with the proposed expenditures of $2.5 million approximately. They're primarily focusing the parks on Putnam Park, Phase 1. This includes the bridge across the Laguna and the pathways around the park up to the bridge. Both the Sunflower Park and the Ronda Floody Ranch Barn are continuing design projects. You'll note that within each of the parks projects, in order to really match funds that are available and to get projects more into scope with how we can manage them with the funds available, we've had to phase out each of these projects. So we have a lot of them, that are in a good design phase, but we're having to stagger them and put them into phases. And that's a part of our capital plan going forward. So this would address Phase 1 for Putnam Park. Next slide. So some other capital projects include the stormwater trash implementation plan, as well as the AV system for our public meetings. Next slide. So again, stopping for questions from council. I also wanted to point out that the detailed project pages have been provided, and they're on packet pages 58 to 93, and they give a really good picture of a detail of each of the projects that we're looking to tackle with the funds included within the budget. Either tackle or I guess also continue design on. Yeah.
Questions? Yeah, good.
I have a question about the street paving, street improvement, and you talked about slurry seal and improvements. Is there anything in the contracts as far as, you know, if there's, like I've noticed over the highway over by Pete's, there's some like spots that are kind of open or anything? I'm just curious about what happens with those.
We pick those up. So when we have a slurry project like the one for 2025 that we design now for construction in the spring, early summer next year, we would pick up areas like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So was that something that originally when it was placed incorrectly, or is that the use? I'm just kind of wondering how it happens, if it's only certain sections of it.
Old Redwood Highway is a very, it gets punished a lot. It just has a lot of traffic and heavy trucks.
Okay.
So we've experienced that inordinately high amount of those types of displaced, wear and
Okay.
defective areas more often in that stretch than
Okay.
other areas. Like if you go to a residential street, you don't see that.
Mm-hmm.
Plus the construction of Old Redwood Highway has this, getting kind of technical, but a concrete base on it. And so you don't have much room between that and the surface. So it's very hard to get something to adhere to it. But what we'll do is dig those areas out and repave it.
I'm just wondering if it's more high use area, if they can change or use different material, I don't know, something so that I don't know how often it happens, but I just thought I'd call that to attention. Thank you.
Yes.
Craig, just for the benefit of everyone, there's multiple ways we do the streets. Can you kind of, there's slurry seal and there's the grind. Can you like do that for the benefit of everyone?
Sure. So the more expensive treatments are when the roads are in poor condition. And so that's what we're going to be seeing starting tomorrow at Redwood Drive with pulverizing, which is where they go down about 17 inches and recycle the existing roadway material. But it's a very extensive process where they're rebuilding the base and almost building a brand new street. So that's very expensive, but that's when a roadway is in very poor condition. Once we have all of another one is taking off the first 3 or 4 inches, grinding it down, and then replacing that with asphalt. And that's what we're going to be doing in a couple of weeks over at Cypress. And those are both rehabilitation. We're kind of doing a very significant improvement. Once all the city streets have reached that good level, then we just come in every 3 or 4 years and do a very thin slurry seal layer. And that's a fraction of the cost. And so what'll happen is ahead of that, we'll go in and there'll be localized spots that are failing, where the base is failing, and you see a lot of cracking. Those will just be dug out down about 4 or 5 inches and then built back up. But those are just very limited spots. And then once that's done, the slurry seal will come over it. So those are basically the two types of treatment, or the rehab and then the low-cost slurry.
Thank you for that. And I believe that, I think I heard you say it's 3 to 4 years expectation on slurry seal. And we did Old Redwood, well, we've done it multiple times, but when was the last time we did the seal on that? It seems like a few years.
It's been 2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years.
Yes.
That's it.
And we're not seeing a wholesale failure.
Right.
We're just seeing very spot
Yeah,
failures.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so everything that we just talked about, all those capital projects, really a majority of it, like you see, is funded from the general fund. So keeping that fund balance, really is what helps us be able to continue to fund the significant projects. So we have some updates to the general fund. So when we presented it to you previously, we were focused on really just operations, dig down deep into the operations, what's happening with revenue, what's happening with expenses. But now we have other sources and uses. So this is on packet page 94. So update, or is that summary page of the general fund. So updates to the general fund are primarily updates for the other funds and uses, which is the interfund loans from the water and sewer that are paying back the general fund, who pays those debt services for their allocation of the pension obligation bond. And then we have the debt payment, for both of those uses. And then we have the updating of transfers in and transfers out, which is a detailed, I actually this year provided a detail of transfers in, and that was provided on page 96, which shows the funds that are transferring out and the funds that are transferring in. For the general fund, we have transfers in coming in from the Public Safety Special Revenue Fund, from the Veterans Building Fund, the Community Facilities District, as well as the South Sonoma Business Park, a minor contribution there. And then we have the transfers out, which again is that just over $4 million to capital projects, 12.5 to the special revenue funds, which is primarily the K-9 fund, and then another contribution of $319,000 going to the capital grants fund, which those capital grants are funding those other capital projects that are getting grant matching funds. So again, a majority of it, $4.3 million, is going towards capital projects. Next slide. So in conclusion, the balanced budget is included here. We think it's really fairly prudent. We're going to continue to fine tune it based on things that are changing, like the insurance, making the updates to the formatting. If we have anything new that's coming in based on our water and sewer assumptions, based on people now moving to use more water now that we have hopefully I love the rain, it's great, but having some irrigation happening and maybe get some mowing going, so there might be some increased water usage that will lead to some change in revenues. City staff will continue to update council on any significant budgetary changes prior to budget adoption. And we again might have that included with the budget adoption with the staff report if it comes in last minute, and we think it's really significant to include. We have the operating reserve requirements met for both the water sewer funds and the general fund, and we really think it's prudent for us to continue to be conservative. I know you're going to make fun of me. Conservative based on our revenues as well as our expenses. We want to make sure that we're here to serve our community and we have the means to do that as long as we can, right? And we want to be able to do the projects that our community is asking for. So I'm going to turn it over to you for questions again, one last time. And I do also want to comment that we're hoping to bring the financial policies to the council as well fairly soon. And so there'll be also some opportunity to talk about some budgetary conservative approaches that we can include within those policies at that time.
All right, thank you. Yes, question?
You mentioned the change of water and sewer billing to monthly. I see a little bit of chatter here and there about that. Have you had to respond to many different calls about that? And what typically is the problem that has happened?
So we have had, calls, and we're always here to answer questions for any of our community. We, calls, email, please reach out to us if you have any questions. A majority of it is that our bills are confusing. The billing format, we're working to get that fixed with our ERP system so that it better aligns with what the actual information is that needs to be conveyed, because we have a different format that is sent to those who are getting it mailed to them, and a different version of those who are getting it emailed to them, because the email comes through the ERP system and the other billing cycle comes through our mailing processor, and they have a different format. And so we really want to cease doing that and provide our billing processor, our mailing processor, the same formatted bills. So that will help address any questions of somebody who's also getting an email bill and a physical bill, going like, why do these look different? Why, what these, the graphs look different? So we want some consistency. We want to make sure we're sharing the same thing across all of our portal. There was on the last billing, so we've also implemented something called Temetra. We previously had MVRS, which was a billing system, and it was pulling the meter reads to be able to pull it into our billing system, software system. We've moved to the system called Temetra because the other one was no longer being supported. With that move, with the billing cycle covering from February to March, unfortunately, it pulled reads that were at the beginning of the poll rather than as of that date. So we pulled a read and it said, hey, the language within it says pull a read within the state range, because we don't want to send out a public works staff to go read a meter physically if we don't have a read on that day. So we give it a range and we say, hey, give us a read within this range, and hopefully, some days the system doesn't read a meter, but it will the day before or the day before that, and it's close enough, right? Because we're looking at close enough reads. Because if I send it to a public works staff for them to go read, it's going to be another 3 days before they can go and get it, and I can get a new read. So what the system did is it pulled a read from the beginning of the read period as opposed to the end of the read period. And so that led to a smaller bill for the February to March bill and a little bit bigger bill in the March to April bill. So I think that this happening right as people were just getting into monthly billing has been probably the most recent, the most questions that we get, because they're like, wait, my new bill was $100, for example. That's what my last bill was, and this month it's $130. What happened? And so it's, those 5-10 day difference, 5 days, can make that much of a difference when you're just looking at a month. So that's been the most recent issues, and we're looking, we've fixed Temetra. We're gonna make sure that's done, and it was fixed for the last one. We're gonna just keep testing it and making sure it's pulling the right reads from the right period. It has the right language, nothing changes. We don't have some update that decides to fix something for us. And then continuing to work with our ERP system to fix those utility bills so that they're consistent and in a proper format for our community that makes sense.
And so how do we just explain this to people when they call and say that it's?
We also have an email that we've drafted up, and that we've been providing to customers that give an example of, here's what, if you had a bill where the read was this on this date, this on this date, this is on this date, here's what you were, billed for, here's what you would be billed for if it was the reads were more average, and that it's the same. And so we've drafted up that email so we can get those out to customers and letting them know, we're here for any questions. If you can't afford this right now, we have the payment plans available, all those kinds of things. For the most part, everyone's been very, not everyone, right? It's been a few people here and there. But again, it's more than we like to have. We don't want anyone to have concerns over their bill. So we've just addressed them on a one-by-one basis outside of that email.
So now that we've transitioned to the 2 new systems going forward, we should be, okay, all right, thank you.
I just had a follow-up question about that. Would it be maybe good to put a disclaimer on the date range that's on the bills that says, this was February 15th to March 15th, asterisk, meter reads could happen slightly off of these dates or something like that? And also, even if folks have not complained or reached out to you, they might be wondering if they have a water leak because of how large some of the bills were in that second month of that period. So I think it would be good to, sounds like we've got an email drafted, but to reach out to all the customers and just let them know that that 1 month might have been artificially high. Yeah, because mine was 7 times more water usage in the second month. So it was a huge, I thought, I don't know, I thought we're leaking underground or something. But anyway, so it would be good to let people know.
That is a good point. We have also been telling or offering people to sign up for leak alerts, and then also showing them the water consumption tables, because we can get into the system and show you, you've had average consumption of this, and so it really is that beginning period. So we do want people still to call in, but we do want to tell them about the tools that we have available for leak alerts and such. Yeah, but a
And
notification.
I just add too real quick that for the utility newsletter that we're working on, I'm also starting to think about what we could put in that to hopefully just give people these.
Yes, Councilmember Rivers.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, we had a pretty alarming one as well. So I'm just thinking, in the newsletter, if it could, the newsletter is electronic, correct? Is there one that is electronic?
It's both, but yeah.
Okay, so what I'm thinking is it would be really great if the paper one referred to, a site or something where we could link to those tools that you're talking about, because, we also had that concern. We had a hose that was, had a hole, and we thought that we had taken care of it, and then we're very concerned that we hadn't, right? Because it was crazy. So I think that would be really helpful to be a little more proactive and a little less reactive on that. Just because, it was not planned, right? We didn't realize that was going to happen. So thank you.
Yeah, and with that, thinking about this, since we are monthly, we have another utility bill that's coming fairly soon, right? We're going to be pulling rates the end of this week and generating that bill. So even in the bill comment section, because that's on the bills for everyone, that can, it's right there on the face of it that describes, that component. So it's not even, maybe you might not have customers that really read, a newsletter or have the version of the electronic, newsletter that they know to go to or that we direct them to. So that would also be somewhere that we can provide that directly on the billing.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it would be a really great opportunity for us to kind of highlight for the next few months the tools that are available to people, because I watch now myself when when I see a little blip, and I do get notified. I know what causes mine now, but anyways, I think at least for the next few months, it would be good to highlight that on the bills or as a separate insert or something, just because I think a lot of people just really don't know that they could be looking at their daily usage. And they don't know that, so.
All right. Other questions? Okay.
So then that completes the study session. So because we combined both A and B, and so then I would just turn it back to council for any future direction or other items that should be implemented within the budget.
Well, thank you very much for the really detailed and professionally compiled information, as always. Does anyone have any comments or direction? Yeah.
Yeah, I just also wanted to thank it. I don't know if it's just better glasses, but it seemed like the numbers were a lot more legible this time, like just a lot bigger, and I really appreciate that.
And I always appreciate it when you put all the details in there about the projects, because then I don't have to wonder what they are. And they're very descriptive and very informative. And anybody that's interested in knowing, what's going on, I would encourage them to look at those details because they are pretty specific. But I enjoy those.
Craig and Damien do a great job on those. I can't take credit for that.
Okay, if there are no other comments, then we move on to information received after the agenda was posted. Was there any information received?
There was just those minor corrections to the percentages that Director Corder alluded to earlier. No public comments on this agenda. Thank you, Mayor Sparks.
All right, thank you very much. With that, we are adjourned.